Nero Wolfe and the Village in the Desert. It was a Wednesday in late October when the telegram arrived, and if I'd known it would drag Nero Wolfe out of his comfortable Manhattan fortress and into 112 degrees of Arizona heat, I might have fed it to the dogs instead of delivering it to his desk. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That morning started the way most Wednesdays did at the brownstone on West 35th Street. I came down at 8:15 to find Fritz already orchestrating breakfast with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. The aroma of his sausages and fresh-baked rolls competed with the scent of coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Through the kitchen window, early autumn sunlight hit the bulletproof glass at an angle that made it gleam like polished steel. If Fort Knox ever needed a consultant, Wolfe could have drawn the blueprints in his sleep. Caesar, our senior Doberman and self-appointed guardian of all things Wolfe, was stationed near the back door, his massive head turning at my approach. Mars flanked him, slightly smaller but twice as aggressive when it counted. Apollo had his nose pressed to the reinforced window, tracking something only he could see in the small yard. Minerva sat near Wolfe's empty chair, looking contemplative if a dog could look contemplative. Diana, the swift one, was doing her morning patrol of the hallway, and Loyal, our brick-red pit bull with the white blaze and notched ear, was sprawled across the doorway between kitchen and hall, right where I'd trip over him if I wasn't careful. "Morning, Army," I said, stepping over Loyal. His tail thumped twice. The brass plate on his handmade leather collar caught the light. 918 West 35th Street, New York. Fritz had commissioned that collar from an artisan in Brooklyn. The word Loyal was tooled into the leather in bold letters, which seemed redundant given that the dog would probably take a bullet for Wolfe without hesitation. "Mr. Goodwin," Fritz said, not looking up from his sausage evaluation. "Mr. Wolfe requests you bring the mail to his desk at 9 sharp. He is particularly expecting correspondence." "Since when does Wolfe expect correspondence on a Wednesday?" "Since yesterday, when he received a telephone call he declined to discuss with anyone, including me." That was interesting. Wolfe's schedule was as fixed as the North Star. 9 to 11 in the plant rooms on the roof, tending his orchids with Theodore Horstman. 11:15, down to his office. Lunch at 1. More office time. Dinner at 7. Evening reading. Any deviation suggested either a major case or indigestion, and Fritz's cooking eliminated the latter. I poured coffee, grabbed a roll, and settled in to scan the morning papers. Nothing earth-shattering. A shipping strike in Baltimore. Some Hollywood starlet divorcing her fourth husband. The usual political posturing in Washington. I was halfway through the sports section when the doorbell rang. It was 8:47, too early for clients, too late for deliveries. Through the one-way glass panel beside the door, I could see a Western Union messenger, young kid with the regulation cap and a yellow envelope. I opened the door to the limit of the chain, took the telegram, signed for it, and gave him a quarter. He looked at the coin like I'd handed him a subway token. "But that's inflation for you." The telegram was addressed to Nero Wolfe, marked urgent. The sender was listed as Dr. L. Vance, Rock Springs Desert Research Station, Arizona. I carried it upstairs, timing my arrival at Wolfe's desk for exactly 9 o'clock. Punctuality wasn't just appreciated in that house, it was commandment. Wolfe was already behind his desk, all 285 pounds of him, settled into the custom-made chair that creaked under his weight, but had never, in my 7 years working for him, collapsed. His round face was placid, his dark eyes half closed, as he read something I couldn't see from my position. The morning light through the bulletproof window behind him, the glass installed after an unfortunate incident involving a disgruntled counterfeiter and a brick, made his bald head shine like a bronze Buddha. "Telegram," I said, placing it on his desk blotter. "From Arizona. Someone named Dr. L. Vance." Wolfe's eyes opened fully. His hand, surprisingly delicate for a man his size, reached for the envelope. He opened it with the ivory-handled letter opener, a gift from a grateful client in Singapore, and extracted the yellow paper. I watched his face as he read. His expression didn't change, but something in the way his fingers tightened on the paper told me this wasn't routine. "Archie," he said finally, "read this." I took the telegram and read. "Nero, grave situation, stop. They found the wrong tomb, and they know I know. Stop, cannot trust local authorities. Stop, need your mind more than police. Stop, remember Montevideo and the orchids. Stop, your friend Lionel Vance. Stop." "Montevideo?" I asked. 1937. a conference on hybrid cattleyas. Dr. Vance was a promising young archaeologist with an unfortunate passion for rare orchids. We spent 3 evenings discussing cultivation techniques and the peculiar challenges of growing temperamental species in hostile climates. A brilliant mind, if somewhat prone to melodrama. He sounds like he's in trouble. So it would appear. Wolfe set the telegram down and looked at me. Please attempt to place a telephone call to the Rock Springs Desert Research Station, Arizona. I wish to speak with Dr. Vance. I went to my desk, pulled out the phone directory, and started the process. It took 4 calls, 3 transfers, and a conversation with a switchboard operator in Phoenix who seemed convinced Arizona was a foreign country. But I finally got through to something called the Rock Springs Administrative Office. A woman's voice answered, brisk and businesslike. Rock Springs Station. How may I direct your call? I'm trying to reach Dr. Lionel Vance. This is Archie Goodwin calling from New York on behalf of Nero Wolfe. There was a pause. Then, I'm sorry, sir. Dr. Vance is unavailable. When will he be available? Another pause, longer this time. Sir, I'm not authorized to discuss personnel matters. If you'll give me a number, I can have someone return your call. What do you mean personnel matters? Is he sick? Sir, is he dead? The silence that followed answered my question better than words. Please have someone call us, I said, and gave her the number. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. She wouldn't confirm it, but I'd bet my next paycheck your orchid-loving archaeologist is no longer with us. Wolfe's eyes closed, his lips pushed out, pulled in, pushed out again, his way of thinking when something bothered him more than he wanted to admit. The telegram was sent yesterday at 4:17 p.m. Arizona time, less than 20 hours ago. If Dr. Vance is dead, it happened very quickly after he contacted me. Maybe that's what they know I know meant. Perhaps. The phone rang at 9:43. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. Mr. Goodwin, this is Special Agent Roland Kemper, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately regarding Dr. Lionel Vance. I covered the mouthpiece. ABI, Agent named Kemper, about Vance. Wolfe grimaced but gestured for me to put it on speaker. I pressed the button. Mr. Wolfe is listening, I said. Mr. Wolfe, I apologize for the short notice, but I'm currently en route to your location from our New York field office. I need to discuss Dr. Vance's death and the telegram he sent you before he died. This is a matter of national security. I should arrive at your door in approximately 8 minutes. I do not receive callers without an appointment, Wolfe said. Wednesday morning is reserved for... Sir, with all due respect, a man is dead under circumstances the federal government considers extremely sensitive. You received what may be his final communication. I'm not requesting an audience. I'm informing you that this conversation will happen today. The only question is whether it happens civilly in your office or less civilly elsewhere. Wolfe's face reddened slightly. Nobody threatens Nero Wolfe in his own office, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Curiosity was already working on him, and curiosity was Wolfe's greatest weakness after food and orchids. 8 minutes, Wolfe said. Not a moment longer, or you'll find the door locked. I'll be there in 6, Kemper said, and hung up. I looked at Wolfe. Well, this just got interesting. It was already interesting, Archie. Now it's merely complicated. Please alert Fritz that we may have a guest for lunch, and inform him that any federal agent who arrives wearing a suit in October heat is either foolish or desperate. Desperate men can be useful, and foolish ones are merely entertaining. Special Agent Roland Kemper was neither foolish nor desperate. He was, however, punctual. The doorbell rang at 9:49, and when I opened the door after checking through the one-way glass, I found a man in his middle 40s, lean, grey-eyed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His handshake was firm without being aggressive. Mr. Goodwin, he said, thank you for seeing me. Thank Mr. Wolfe's curiosity, not his hospitality. I led him down the hall, aware that all 6 dogs had materialized from various corners of the brownstone. Caesar took point, Mars and Apollo flanked, Minerva observed from the stairs, Diana circled behind, and Loyal pressed close to my side. Kemper noticed them but didn't comment, a point in his favor. Men who fear dogs usually have reason. In the office, Wolfe didn't rise from his chair. He never did for anyone, except a select few ladies of his acquaintance. "Special Agent Kemper, please sit." Kemper took the red leather chair. The dogs settled into defensive positions around the room, not threatening, but not welcoming either. Caesar's eyes never left the visitor. "Mr. Wolfe, I'll be direct. Dr. Lionel Vance died yesterday evening at approximately 6:30 p.m. Arizona time. He was found in his quarters at the Rock Springs Desert Research Station with what appeared to be symptoms of severe dehydration and heat stroke. The station's physician pronounced him dead at the scene." "Appeared to be?" I asked. "The initial examination was cursory. Given certain irregularities, we're treating this as a potential homicide. The telegram Dr. Vance sent you approximately 2 hours before his death is now evidence in a federal investigation." "What kind of irregularities?" Wolfe asked. "The kind that involve classified government contracts, international mineral rights, and approximately $40 million in disputed claims." Kemper leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, Rock Springs isn't really a research station. It's a cover. The government has been quietly investigating a potential uranium deposit beneath what was supposed to be an archaeological site. Dr. Vance was there as a consultant. His expertise was needed to determine whether certain mineral formations were natural or indicated ancient mining activity. And someone wanted him silenced," Wolfe said. "It wasn't a question. We believe so. But we have a problem. The station houses 14 people, scientists, security personnel, support staff. Any one of them could be the killer, and we can't simply interrogate them en masse without tipping our hand about the uranium. Officially, Rock Springs is still just an archaeological project." "Then send in your own investigators," Wolfe said. "The FBI has capable men." We did. 2 agents arrived this morning. Within 3 hours, one had his Jeep sabotaged, nearly died when his brakes failed on a desert highway. The other received a threatening message carved into his hotel room door. Someone at that station has resources and isn't afraid to use them. Wolfe was silent for a moment. Then, "You want me to solve your murder? I want you to identify the killer before this situation explodes into an international incident. If word gets out about the uranium before we secure the site, we'll have claim jumpers, foreign agents and corporate vultures descending like locusts. Dr. Vance's death needs to be resolved quietly, efficiently, and above all, conclusively." "I do not travel, Mr. Kemper. I investigate from this office, using my faculties and Archie's legs. If you want a detective who will fly to Arizona, there are several competent men in this city who—" "Mr. Wolfe," Kemper interrupted, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "I'm authorized to offer you $50,000. Half now, half upon resolution. All expenses paid, including first-class accommodations, transportation, and any special requirements you might have." He placed the envelope on the desk. "That includes climate-controlled quarters with temperatures no higher than 72 degrees, a kitchen facility meeting your standards, and daily air shipment of fresh ingredients from New York if necessary." I watched Wolfe's face. 50,000 was serious money. The climate control was smart. Kemper had done his homework. But it was the next part that sealed it. "There's also the matter of Dr. Vance's final words," Kemper said quietly. "They found the wrong tomb, and they know I know. He sent that to you, Mr. Wolfe, not to the FBI, not to the station director, not to the local police, to you. A man you hadn't seen in 15 years trusted you enough to make you his last chance at justice. Are you really going to let him down because you don't like to travel?" It was manipulative, calculated, and completely effective. Wolfe's eyes opened. "When would we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Military transport from Mitchell Field. You'll be in Arizona by evening. I require 48 hours to arrange my affairs. My orchids need specialized care. My household must be secured. Archie must pack properly, and I must prepare certain materials." 36 hours, Kemper said. "Absolute maximum. Every day we wait, the killer has more time to cover their tracks." Wolfe looked at me. I shrugged. "We've been to worse places. Remember that warehouse in Jersey City? That was 5 miles from home." Wolfe said, "This is 5 states. Look at it this way. You'll finally get to see what a cactus looks like in person instead of in photographs." Wolfe glared at me, then turned back to Kemper. 36 hours, but I want full background files on everyone at that station, complete transcripts of Dr. Vance's reports. and a secured communication line to Theodore Horstman, who will be managing my plant rooms in my absence. Non-negotiable. Done, Kemper said, standing. He pulled a card from his wallet. Call this number when you're ready. And Mr. Wolfe? Thank you. Lionel Vance was a good man. After he left, I turned to Wolfe. So, Arizona. Confound it, Wolfe muttered, reaching for the beer opener in his desk drawer. It was only 10:15, but this clearly qualified as exceptional circumstances. Archie, please inform Fritz that we will be traveling to a god-forsaken desert to investigate a murder. He should prepare accordingly. Accordingly? How? With resignation and sympathy. One of us is going to suffer greatly, and it won't be Fritz. I grinned. It's going to be educational. For someone, certainly. Though I suspect you'll find more education than I will comfort. He was right about that. But as I headed to tell Fritz the news, Loyal trailing at my heels, I couldn't help feeling a strange excitement. Nero Wolfe in the desert. This was either going to be brilliant or disastrous. Probably both. 36 hours later, I was strapping Wolfe into a military transport aircraft, while he recited every reason this was a catastrophically terrible idea. The list was impressive in both length and creativity. The pressurization will affect my ears. The temperature differential will trigger respiratory distress. The angle of ascent may cause circulatory complications. The vibration alone will be less annoying than listening to you complain for the next 4 hours. I finished. Breathe, boss. It's just flying. People do it every day. People are idiots. The plane was a modified C-47, fitted with actual seats instead of cargo webbing. Kemper's doing, I assumed. Besides us, there were 4 other passengers, 2 Air Force officers who looked bored, a civilian contractor who looked nervous, and a nurse who looked like she'd heard every excuse not to fly and wasn't impressed by Wolfe's contribution. Loyal was in a carrier at my feet, calm and alert. The dogs back home had staged what I could only describe as a strategic retreat when we started packing, each finding a corner to sulk in. Caesar had actually blocked the front door at one point, forcing me to carry our luggage out the back. It was the closest thing to a protest I'd ever seen from a dog. Theodore had taken charge of the brownstone with his usual Germanic efficiency, aided by Fritz's detailed instructions about feeding schedules, security protocols, and emergency contacts. Inspector Kramer had stopped by to ask what lunacy we were up to now, seen the luggage, and left muttering about vacations from sanity. The dogs had greeted him with their usual mix of tolerance and suspicion. Even after years of visits, Kramer remained on their acceptable but not trusted list. Caesar had sniffed his shoes thoroughly. Mars had given him the evil eye, and Loyal had stationed himself between Kramer and Wolfe's office until the inspector left. At least take some advice, Kramer had said at the door. Don't drink the cactus water, don't trust anyone wearing a cowboy hat, and don't let Wolfe solve crimes outside his jurisdiction. I've got enough paperwork without interstate complications. No promises, I'd said. Now, as the engines roared to life and the plane began its taxi, I watched Wolfe's knuckles turn white on the armrests. His eyes were closed. His lips were moving slightly, probably pricing out the cost of this misery in terms of orchids or meals. You know, I said, loud enough to be heard over the engines. Dr. Vance must have been some friend for you to do this. Wolfe's eyes opened. Lionel Vance once spent an entire evening explaining to me the theory that certain South American tribes cultivated orchids, not for beauty but for spiritual communion. He believed that prolonged exposure to Cattleya blooms could induce mild euphoric states. Nonsense, of course, but brilliant nonsense, delivered with such passion that I almost believed him. You liked him. I respected him. In my experience, that's rarer and more valuable. The plane lifted off. Wolfe's jaw clenched, but he didn't complain further. Instead, he pulled out a folder Kemper had delivered that morning, personnel files from Rock Spring Station. Read these with me, he said. I want your impressions. I opened my copy. There were 14 personnel files, each with a photograph, background summary, and current assignment. Wolfe had already made notes in the margins. Dr. Miriam Carraway, I read. Age 38, PhD in archaeological anthropology from Oxford, specialty in pre-Columbian Southwest cultures. Vance's assistant for the past 2 years, currently the senior archaeologist at Rock Springs. Ambitious, Wolfe said. Note the gap in her employment history from 1948 to 1950. 2 years unaccounted for. Could be anything. Illness, personal matters, or something worth hiding. He flipped to the next file. Victor Delling, age 52, private investor and mineral rights speculator, officially funding the archaeological work at Rock Springs through his foundation. I looked at Delling's photo. Square-jawed, silver-haired, expensive suit even in the desert. The kind of face that belonged on a boardroom wall or a wanted poster, depending on perspective. Officially, I said, but actually? Actually, he owns 17% of a Colorado mining company that would benefit enormously from uranium rights in Arizona. Kemper's notes indicate Delling invested $2 million in the Rock Springs project before any archaeological discoveries were announced. How would he know there was uranium before the scientists confirmed it? An excellent question. The next file showed a gaunt man in his 60s with kind eyes and weathered skin. Father Anselm Boyce, I read. Former Jesuit missionary, worked in Central America for 20 years, now a field archaeologist specializing in Spanish colonial sites, currently cataloging Spanish-era artifacts at Rock Springs. A priest turned archaeologist, Wolfe mused. Either a man who lost his faith or one who chose to find God in the dust rather than the pulpit. You're getting philosophical. I'm getting concerned. A man with Boyce's background would have contacts throughout Central and South America, useful contacts if one needed to move artifacts or information across borders. Next was a woman in her 30s, dark-haired, sharp-eyed. Rita Vale, I read, freelance writer and photographer, currently documenting the Rock Springs excavation for National Geographic. Who doesn't exist, Wolfe said flatly. What? What? Kemper's investigators checked. There's a Rita Vale who writes for various publications, but she's currently in Kenya photographing wildlife. The woman at Rock Springs is using a stolen identity. I stared at the photo. So who is she really? Unknown. But someone thought a cover identity worth the risk, which suggests either criminal intent or intelligence work. FBI. Possible. Or CIA. Or corporate espionage. Any of them would have reason to plant someone at a site with uranium implications. We went through the rest. Dr. Hassan Omari, a geologist from Egypt with impeccable credentials and a suspicious absence from certain professional conferences. Gwendolyn Gwen Huxley, the station's administrative coordinator who'd worked for 3 different government contractors in 5 years. Captain Preston Rourke, head of station security, former Army intelligence with a disciplinary record he'd somehow erased. Beatrice Trixie Landauer, the camp cook, whose background check showed 6 different names and 4 different birthplaces. 8 more files followed. Technicians, support staff, security personnel. Each had something off. Not damning, not obvious, but off. Like pieces from different puzzles forced into the same box. Everyone at Rock Springs is hiding something, I said. Indeed, which makes determining who killed Dr. Vance rather more complicated than simply finding the person with a secret. Wolfe closed his file. We must identify not who had something to hide, but who had something to hide that required Lionel Vance's death. No pressure. Archie, in my experience, pressure creates either diamonds or dust. We shall endeavor to be the former. The plane hit turbulence. Wolfe's face went pale. I decided not to mention that we still had 3 hours of flight time remaining. Some diamonds take longer to form than others. We landed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base outside Tucson at 6:47 p.m. local time. The heat hit like a physical force when they opened the plane door, a wall of dry, baking air that sucked moisture from my lungs and made me instantly sympathize with every lizard I'd ever seen in a zoo. Wolfe descended the stairs like a man walking to his execution. "Welcome to Arizona," I said cheerfully. "Isn't the heat invigorating?" "I am going to fire you," Wolfe said. "You say that every time we travel." This time, I mean it. A jeep was waiting on the tarmac, driven by a sunburned corporal who looked like he'd been baking in this heat since birth. Next to him sat a man in civilian clothes, mid-30s, sandy hair, unremarkable face, the kind of man you'd pass on the street and forget immediately. "Mr. Wolfe? I'm Agent Davies, FBI. I'll be your liaison while you're here." He offered a hand. Wolfe ignored it. "Where are the climate-controlled quarters I was promised?" "About 90 miles north. Rock Springs Station is pretty remote." Davies gestured to the jeep. "We've got cold water for the drive, and the station's main building is air-conditioned." Main building, where you'll be working. Yeah, your personal quarters are in the east wing. Fully climate-controlled, private bath, small kitchenette. We flew in a cook from Phoenix to handle your requirements. Fritz Brenner is the only cook who handles my requirements, Wolfe said. This Phoenix person will provide raw ingredients according to a list Archie will supply. Fritz will provide recipes via telephone. Is this understood? Davies blinked. Oh, yes, sir. Then let us proceed. The sooner we arrive, the sooner we can leave. The drive north was an education in just how much nothing the desert could contain. Miles of scrub brush, rock formations, and heat shimmer. The sky was enormous and hostile. Loyal stuck his head out the window, tongue lolling, apparently enjoying himself. Wolfe sat rigid, jaw clenched, one hand gripping the jeep's roll bar. Tell me about the station, Wolfe said. Physical layout. Davies navigated a pothole the size of a bathtub. Rock Springs is built around a natural spring, only reliable water source for 20 miles. Main complex has 8 buildings arranged in a rough circle around the spring. Central building houses administration, mess hall, and main laboratory. 4 residential buildings, each with 4 private quarters. Security building with armory and communications. Equipment shed. Generator building. We're completely off-grid out here. And the excavation site? About quarter-mile east. They've uncovered what they think is a Spanish mission from the 1700s, plus some older native structures underneath. The dig itself is maybe 30 feet deep in spots. Who has access? Everyone, technically. But the main artifact vault is in the lab building, secured 20. Wolfe absorbed this. And Dr. Vance's death. Found in his quarters at 6:34 p.m. He'd missed dinner, unusual for him, apparently. So Dr. Carraway went to check on him. Found him collapsed near his desk. Station physician Dr. Amari responded immediately but pronounced him dead. Symptoms: severe dehydration, elevated core temperature, confusion preceding collapse. Classic heat stroke presentation. In climate-controlled quarters. That's the thing, Davies said. His air conditioning was off. Thermostat showed it had been manually disabled around 2 p.m., right after Vance sent you that telegram. Manually disabled by whom? That's the question, isn't it? We drove in silence for another 20 miles. The sun was setting now, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood. It was beautiful in a hostile, alien way. Wolfe stared at it with the expression of a man contemplating his own grave. There, Davies said, pointing ahead. Rock Spring Station appeared on the horizon like a mirage. Low buildings arranged around a patch of surprising green. Solar panels glinted on every roof. A radio tower speared into the darkening sky. Lights were coming on in windows, warm against the cooling desert. As we got closer, I could see figures moving between buildings. Someone waved. Davies waved back. They know you're coming, he said. Official story is you're a special consultant brought in to catalogue Vance's research notes. Only Captain Rourke and Dr. Carraway know the real reason. And the killer? I asked. Gets to sweat, wondering what you know. Davies grinned. Should be interesting. We pulled into what passed for a parking area. Packed dirt, marked spaces, 3 other vehicles. As the jeep stopped, people began emerging from buildings. I counted 8 in the first minute, more following. They formed a loose semicircle, watching us with expressions ranging from curious to wary, to openly hostile. Wolfe climbed out of the jeep with as much dignity as a man his size could muster in 104-degree heat. He surveyed the assembled group with his half-closed eyes, and I could practically hear his mind filing away faces, body language, initial impressions. A woman stepped forward, late 30s, sun-weathered skin, intelligent eyes. Dr. Carraway, I guessed. Mr. Wolfe, welcome to Rock Springs. I'm Miriam Carraway. I was Dr. Vance's assistant. My condolences, Wolfe said. Save them. Lionel didn't die of heat stroke. He was murdered, and I'm told you're here to prove it. So much for discretion. A murmur ran through the assembled group, the hostile expressions multiplied. A large man with captain's bars on his collar stepped forward, face red. That's classified information, Doctor. Preston, everyone here already knows something's wrong. We're scientists and security personnel, not idiots. Carraway turned back to Wolfe. We want to help. Lionel deserves justice. Justice, Wolfe said, requires truth. Truth requires investigation. Investigation requires cooperation. Are you all prepared to cooperate? Silence. Then a silver-haired man in expensive desert casual stepped forward. Delling, the investor. I'm prepared to cooperate with removing this circus from my research station. You have 48 hours, Mr. Wolfe. After that, I'm calling my lawyers and my friends in Washington. Your station, Wolfe said mildly. I was under the impression this was a federal facility. My money built it. My money keeps it running. Federal oversight doesn't change ownership. Interesting perspective. We can discuss property law later, Mr. Delling. For now, I require my quarters, dinner in 2 hours, and a complete meeting of all station personnel at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Mandatory attendance. You can't order. Delling started. I just did. If you have objections, take them up with Special Agent Kemper and the federal government. I hear they're quite reasonable about murder investigations on government-funded projects. Delling's face went purple. For a moment I thought he might physically attack Wolfe. Then he spun and stalked off toward the largest building. Well, I said into the silence, this is going well. Carraway smiled slightly. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. Come on, I'll show you to your quarters. Fair warning, they're probably the nicest rooms on site. Lionel pulled strings. Dr. Vance was considerate even in death, Wolfe said. A rare quality. As we followed Carraway toward the residential buildings, Loyal trotting beside us, I noticed the others dispersing slowly. Most went back to their buildings. A few lingered, watching. One man in particular, mid-30s, dark hair, intense eyes, stood absolutely still, staring at Wolfe with an expression I couldn't quite read. I made a mental note. In my experience, the person who watches the detective most carefully is usually the person with the most to hide, or the person who plans to kill him next. The quarters were, as promised, exceptional. 2 connected rooms, a bedroom with a king-sized bed, and a sitting area that had been converted into an office. The air conditioning was set to a perfect 70 degrees. A small kitchenette occupied one corner, stocked with basics. Fresh flowers. How they'd managed that I had no idea. Sat on the desk. Lionel's notes and files are there, Carraway said, pointing to 3 banker's boxes stacked by the desk. His personal effects are in evidence, but his research materials are available. I've included my own notes on his recent work. Thank you, Wolfe said, already eyeing the boxes with interest. Dinner's in the mess hall at 8, but I can have something brought here if you prefer. Here would be preferable. Something simple. I'll talk to Trixie. She's our cook. Word of warning, she's got a mouth on her, but she's a genius with limited ingredients. Carraway paused at the door. Mr. Wolfe, do you really think you can find who killed Lionel? Dr. Carraway, I have solved murders in locked rooms, murders without bodies, and murders where the victim died 3 days after the killer was arrested. A murder in the desert is merely a matter of perspective and patience. Which are you short on? Perspective. But Archie provides that. After she left, I let Loyal out of his carrier. He immediately started investigating every corner of the room, nose working overtime. Wolfe settled into the desk chair, which groaned but held, and opened the first box. Thoughts? He asked, not looking up. They're all scared, I said, and they're all hiding it in different ways. Delling's hiding behind anger, Carraway's hiding behind professionalism, Captain Rourke's hiding behind authority, and the man who was watching us. You saw him too? Difficult to miss intense scrutiny. Who was he? I consulted the files Davies had left in the jeep. Probably Marcus Yao, mineralogist and chemical engineer, age 33, PhD from Caltech, 3 years at Rock Springs. Background check showed he used to work for Kaiser Industries. Kaiser Industries, Wolfe repeated, which has extensive mining interests. Yep. So we have a mineralogist with corporate mining connections, an investor with mineral rights interests, a priest with cross-border contacts, a journalist using a stolen identity, and a dead archaeologist who discovered the wrong tomb. Wolfe pulled out a sheaf of papers. This will be complex, but solvable. Everything is solvable, Archie. The question is whether we solve it before the killer decides we're inconvenient. I looked out the window at the desert darkness. Somewhere out there, in one of these buildings, was someone who'd killed once and might kill again. I checked my revolver, a Toyn 38 Smith & Wesson I'd carried for years, and made sure it was loaded. In the desert, it's always better to be prepared. Dinner arrived at 8:30, delivered by Trixie Landauer herself, a woman in her 50s with dyed red hair, bright blue eyeshadow, and the voice of a carnival barker who'd smoked too many cigars. "You're the big shot detective," she announced, setting down a tray. "I made you pot roast. It's good. Eat it." Wolfe examined the plate. "Madam, I appreciate..." "Trixie, and I don't care what you appreciate. I care that you clean that plate because I don't tolerate food waste." She lit a cigarette in Wolfe's presence, which showed either courage or insanity. "Dr. Vance loved my pot roast. Ate here 3 times a week minimum. Good man. Shame what happened." "You believe he was murdered?" "Honey, I've been cooking in rough places since before you were born. I know when someone's been killed, and I know when someone wants to cover it up. That man didn't die of heat stroke. His color was wrong, his pupils were wrong, and he'd eaten lunch 2 hours before he died. You don't get heat stroke 2 hours after a full meal in air conditioning." Wolfe's interest sharpened. "You saw the body?" "Helped carry it to the medical bay. Dr. Amari called for assistance. I was closest." "Describe what you saw." Trixie took a long drag on her cigarette, eyes distant. "He was on the floor by his desk. Looked like he'd tried to reach the door. His face was red. Yeah, but not the right kind of red. More like flushed. And his pupils were huge, like he'd been drugged or something." "Drugged," Wolfe repeated. "Just a guess. But I've seen drugged, and I've seen heat stroke. This was different." She tapped ash into the tray she'd brought. "You want my opinion? Someone dosed him with something that mimicked heat stroke symptoms, turned off his AC, and waited for him to collapse. Clean, relatively painless, easy to explain." "That's remarkably specific." "That's experience, honey." Trixie stood. "You want more food? You let me know. You want information? Same deal. I've been here longer than most of these people, and I see things they don't." After she left, I tried the pot roast. It was, I had to admit, exceptional. Wolfe ate in silence, thinking, when he finished, he pushed the plate away and reached for the files again. "Archie, tomorrow morning, I want you to walk the perimeter of this station. Note access points, sight lines, patterns of movement. Then I want you to visit the excavation site. Looking for anything specific?" "Looking for what's wrong." Dr. Vance wrote, "They found the wrong tomb. I want to know what the right tomb would have been." "And you?" "I will be reading these files and establishing who had opportunity. Opportunity is the foundation of every murder. Once we know who could have killed Dr. Vance, we can determine who did." I got Loyal settled for the night. He'd claimed a corner of the room with a view of both doors, naturally, and prepared for bed. Through the window I could see lights in other buildings, people moving, living their lives while we tried to figure out which one of them was a killer. It was going to be a long investigation. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to the desert silence and Loyal's quiet breathing, I couldn't help thinking about Trixie's observation. The wrong color, the wrong pupils, the wrong kind of death. Someone had been very clever. Too clever, maybe. In my experience, the cleverest murders were usually the ones that fell apart first, because the killer couldn't resist adding just one more detail, one more flourish. They wanted credit for their brilliance even as they tried to hide it. The trick was finding that flourish before they tried to erase us too. I fell asleep planning tomorrow's investigation and dreaming of air-conditioned brownstones 3,000 miles away. Morning in the desert is a lie. It tricks you into thinking the heat is reasonable, even pleasant. The sun rises soft and golden, the air is almost cool, and for about 90 minutes you can walk outside without feeling like you're being slow roasted. Then reality sets in, and you remember why civilizations build cities in places with reliable water and temperate climates. I was up at 6:30, showered, dressed, and walking the perimeter by 7. Loyal came with me, happy to be outside and investigating. The Rock Springs complex was roughly circular, maybe 200 yards in diameter, with the spring itself at the center, an actual pool of clear water surrounded by grass, and a few struggling trees. Miraculous in this landscape. The buildings were arranged logically, residential on the west side, coolest in afternoon, mess hall and administration central, lab and equipment shed on the east, security building north near the access road. Solar panels everywhere, feeding into a battery system in the generator building, smart setup for off-grid operation, What interested me more were the sight lines. From the security building, Captain Rourke could see the entire complex. From Dr. Carraway's second-floor lab office, same deal. Several quarters windows overlooked the central spring, including Dr. Vance's room. Anyone walking between buildings after dark would be visible from multiple positions. I made notes, sketched a rough map, and headed for the excavation site. The dig was larger than I'd expected. A sprawling pit carved into rocky soil, with wooden walkways, shade canopies and what looked like several distinct excavation areas. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, gate secured with a padlock. I tried it. Locked. "Can I help you?" I turned to find Father Anselm watching from a few feet away. Up close, he looked older than his photo, 70s maybe, with skin like worn leather and eyes that had seen too much. He wore khaki pants, a white shirt rolled to the elbows, and a sun hat that had seen better decades. "Morning, Father. I'm Archie Goodwin, assisting Mr. Wolfe. Anselm, please." I stopped using Father when I left the Jesuits. He produced a keyring. "I assume you want to see the site?" "If you're offering." He unlocked the gate. I was heading down anyway. "We've got pottery fragments from yesterday that need cataloguing." Inside the fence, the dig revealed itself as far more complex. Multiple excavation layers, carefully marked and documented, ancient stone walls emerging from soil. What looked like the foundation of a large building, the Spanish mission Carraway had mentioned, probably. But it was the deeper pit that caught my attention. A square excavation, maybe 15 feet on each side, dug down to expose older stonework, much older by the look of it. "That's what Lionel was excited about," Anselm said, following my gaze. "Pre-Columbian structure, possibly Hohokam. The Spanish built directly on top of it, as they usually did. Lionel theorized this was originally some kind of ceremonial center. Ceremonial center for what? Water worship, most likely. The spring would have been sacred. Desert cultures always revered water sources. Anselm climbed down a ladder into the deeper pit. I followed. Up close, the stonework was impressive. Precisely cut blocks fitted together without mortar, the kind of construction that spoke of significant resources and organizational skill. Lionel thought this was a tomb, Anselm continued, running his hand along the stones. "Notice the sealed chamber here. We haven't opened it yet. Miriam wants to wait for proper equipment and documentation." But Dr. Vance wanted to open it. He insisted, said time was critical, though he wouldn't explain why. Anselm straightened. 3 weeks ago, he sent soil samples from inside that chamber to a lab in Phoenix. Private lab, paid out of pocket. When the results came back, he locked himself in his quarters for a full day. What were the results? He never said. But after that, he changed, became paranoid. Isn't quite right. Cautious. Watchful. He started making copies of his notes, keeping multiple backups, and he stopped talking freely about the dig. Did he seem afraid? Anselm considered. More like he'd discovered something that complicated everything. Like finding evidence that contradicts your faith. You're not afraid, exactly, but you're deeply unsettled. That's specific. I've had practice. Anselm smiled slightly. When you lose your faith, Mr. Goodwin, you spend a lot of time recognizing that look in others. We climbed back up to the main excavation level. Loyal had been investigating the perimeter, but he came trotting over when I called. Anselm bent to pet him, and Loyal accepted the attention with regal tolerance. "Beautiful animal," Anselm said. "Loyal, yes? I heard Mr. Wolfe travels with one of his dogs." "Loyal's family," I said. "And he's useful. Good nose, better instincts. I imagine both will be necessary here." Anselm stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Mr. Goodwin, a word of advice? Be very careful who you trust. Rock Springs may look like a simple research station, but the people here, many of us have our reasons for being this far from civilization. Including you, especially me, a Jesuit who left the order, a priest who lost his faith, an archaeologist who digs up what should perhaps stay buried. I'm exactly the kind of man who makes people nervous." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The difference is, I admit it, most people here are still pretending." He walked away toward one of the shade canopies, leaving me with the ancient stones and my notes. I spent another hour at the dig, taking photographs with the camera Davies had provided, making more notes, and trying to understand what Dr. Vance had seen that got him killed. The sealed chamber bothered me. If it was just an empty tomb, why the urgency? Why the private lab testing? Unless it wasn't empty, or unless what was inside wasn't what an archaeological tomb should contain. I was heading back to report to Wolfe when I literally ran into the man who'd been watching us yesterday, Marcus Yao. He'd come around a corner of the mess hall, and we collided hard enough to knock some papers from his hands. "Sorry," I said, bending to help retrieve them. He snatched them back before I could see what they were. "Watch where you're going." "Will do. You're Yao, right? The mineralogist?" His expression shifted. Surprise, then suspicion. "How did you know that?" "Lucky guess. Plus I read the personnel files. MIT, Caltech, Kaiser Industries. Impressive resume." "What exactly are you doing here, Goodwin?" Yao's voice had gone cold. "Besides harassing people and digging through their backgrounds?" "Investigating a murder. You remember Dr. Vance? About 6 feet tall, archaeologist, inconveniently dead?" "Vance died of heat stroke." "You sound very certain about that." "I am certain. I was in the medical bay when they brought him in. I saw the body." "Interesting. The personnel files said you were a mineralogist, not a medical examiner." Yao's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "Just noting facts. You saw the body, you're certain about the cause of death, and you're awfully defensive for someone with nothing to hide." "I'm defensive because people like you come in here making accusations, disrupting work, treating everyone like criminals. This is a research station, not a crime scene." "It's both now," I said. "Sorry if that's inconvenient." He pushed past me, papers clutched to his chest, moving fast toward the lab building. I watched him go, filing away his reaction. Overly defensive, secretive about his papers, present when the body was discovered. Not proof of anything, but definitely interesting. I found Wolfe in our quarters, surrounded by open files, making notes in his precise hand. He'd somehow procured a pitcher of iced tea and was nursing a glass while he read. "Learn anything?" I asked. "Everyone here is lying about something," Wolfe said. "The question is whether any of them are lying about murder." I gave him a summary of my morning. The dig site, the sealed chamber, Father Anselm's warning, my encounter with Yao. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, fingers steepled. "The soil sample troubles me," he said finally. "Dr. Vance sent it to a private laboratory rather than using the station's facilities. Why? Didn't trust the station lab? Or didn't want anyone at the station to know what he was testing for?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "Archie, call Agent Kemper. I want the name of that Phoenix laboratory and access to those test results. On it." While I made the call, Wolfe returned to his reading. Kemper answered on the third ring, sounding harried. "Goodwin, problems already?" "Questions. Dr. Vance sent soil samples to a private lab in Phoenix about 3 weeks before his death. We need those test results." "Hold on." Sounds of papers shuffling. "Yeah, we have that. Desert Analysis Labs on Camelback Road. Results were interesting. Samples showed elevated levels of uranium-238, plus traces of beryllium, thorium, and rare earth elements consistent with monazite deposits." "In English?" "Vance found evidence that the area around the dig site contains commercially viable uranium deposits. Not huge, but significant enough to be worth millions in the current market." I looked at Wolfe. He'd stopped reading. "So the wrong tomb," I said slowly, "was actually the right minerals." "Exactly. Vance thought he'd found an archaeological site. What he actually found was a uranium deposit that someone was trying to excavate under cover of archaeological work." "Someone like Victor Delling?" "Delling's foundation has filed preliminary mineral rights claims on 17 adjacent parcels. If Rock Springs confirms uranium, he controls access to one of the largest new deposits in the Southwest." I whistled. "That's a hell of a motive." "It gets better. 2 days before Vance died, he contacted the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He claimed the site was on land that should have been part of a tribal reservation under an 1882 treaty. If he was right, any mineral rights would belong to the tribe, not private claimants. "So Vance wasn't just inconvenient," Wolfe said, taking the phone from me. "He was legally catastrophic to someone's multi-million-dollar scheme. Agent Kemper, I need complete documentation of all mineral rights filings related to this area. Already being sent to you. Should arrive within the hour via secure courier. Excellent. One more question. Who at Rock Springs would have known about Vance's soil sample results? Anyone with access to his office or files. We know he kept copies in his quarters, but he also stored backups in the main lab. Dr. Carraway would have had access, as would Captain Rourke, and Yao. A pause. Yao had unauthorized access. We found evidence he'd breached the file room security 2 weeks ago. I looked at Wolfe. He nodded. Thank you, Agent Kemper, Wolfe said, and hung up. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the sun was climbing toward its brutal midday peak. Inside, pieces were falling into place. It's about money, I said. It's always about money. Money and land, Wolfe corrected. The oldest motives in human history. Dr. Vance discovered something that threatened a major financial scheme. Someone silenced him. Delling's the obvious suspect, which makes him either guilty or an excellent distraction. Wolfe stood, which was always a production. We need more information. This evening, I'll conduct preliminary interviews with key personnel. You'll observe and take notes. In the meantime, we'll attend lunch and see who avoids sitting near us. The mess hall was bustling when we arrived. Long tables, institutional chairs, the smell of something involving beans and cornbread. Trixie presided over the serving line like a benevolent dictator, slapping portions onto plates and accepting no complaints. We got our food and found seats. Within minutes, I noticed the pattern Wolfe had predicted. People choosing tables far from ours. Conversations stopping when we got too close. Sidelong glances and whispered discussions. Except for 2 people. Father Anselm sat down across from us without hesitation. Mr. Wolfe, I thought you might appreciate company. Or information, Wolfe said. That too. Anselm sampled his beans. You've been asking about Lionel's soil samples. Word travels fast. It's a small station, people talk, and walls are thin. Anselm leaned forward. What they're not talking about is the argument Lionel had with Victor Delling 2 days before he died, loud enough that half the station heard it. About mineral rights. Delling accused Lionel of sabotaging the project. Lionel accused Delling of fraud. It got heated. Define heated. Delling threatened to have Lionel removed from the project. Lionel threatened to go public with evidence that Delling had falsified the original archaeological survey to justify federal funding. Wolfe set down his fork. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Anselm glanced around, lowering his voice. Mr. Wolfe, there are people here who would kill to protect what they've built. This station represents years of work and millions of dollars. If Lionel exposed the truth, everything collapses. Who else heard this argument? Dr. Carraway, certainly. Captain Rourke, possibly Yao. He was working late in the lab that night, and Rita Vale was lurking nearby, as she usually is. The second person who'd ignored the social quarantine was Rita Vale herself, who slid into the seat next to Anselm with a photographer's confident invasion of personal space. Talking about me? She asked cheerfully. Because I'm talking about you. Well, writing about you. Working title, Desert Justice. Can a Manhattan detective solve a murder in the sand? I'd prefer you didn't, Wolfe said. Too late. I've already filed my first dispatch to National Geographic. Well, to the email I'm claiming belongs to National Geographic. She grinned. I assume you know I'm not really Rita Vale. We suspected. Smart. Real Rita's a friend. She's letting me borrow her credentials for this story. I'm actually Ingrid Moss, freelance investigative journalist. I've been investigating Delling's operation here for 6 months. Why? Because Delling's been running the same scam in 3 different states. Claim archaeological significance, get federal grants, find convenient mineral deposits, profit. Rock Springs is his biggest operation yet. When I heard an archaeologist died under suspicious circumstances, I knew it was my chance to break the story. So you're using a murder investigation as a career opportunity, I said. I'm exposing corporate fraud that's costing taxpayers millions. If that also makes my career, I won't apologize. She pulled out a small notebook. Want to compare notes? I've got 6 years of Delling's financial records. Wolfe considered her. This evening, 7 p.m. My quarters. Bring your evidence. Deal. She stood. For what it's worth, I liked Lionel. He was honest, which is rare out here. Whoever killed him should burn. She left. Anselm followed shortly after, muttering something about pottery shards. We finished our meal in relative peace. So, I said, Delling's running a multi-state fraud scheme. Vale, or Moss, is investigating him. Vance discovered the truth and got killed, and Yao's breaking into file rooms. This is getting complicated. Murder usually is, Wolfe said. But the foundation remains simple. Someone gained from Vance's death. We need only determine who gained most. That afternoon, while Wolfe read through Delling's financial records, courtesy of Agent Kemper's fast courier, I took Loyal for a walk around the station, partly for exercise, partly to let the dog work, partly to see who else might be willing to talk. We ended up at the security building, where Captain Preston Rourke was conducting what looked like a inventory check of weapons. He saw us coming and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Goodwin, your boss settling in okay? As well as a man who hates heat, travel, and disruption can settle into a desert murder investigation. Rourke didn't smile. Look, I know you two are here to find Vance's killer, but I need you to understand something. This station operates under strict security protocols. We have classified materials, sensitive research, and protocols I can't discuss even with federal investigators. Protocols that include covering up murder. His face reddened. We didn't cover up anything. Vance died of heat stroke in his quarters. Natural causes ruled by a licensed physician, who happened to be on site. Convenient. What are you implying? That Dr. Amari might have been encouraged to reach a particular conclusion about the cause of death. That's slander. It's hypothesis. Want to help me prove it wrong? Open your incident logs. Show me the security camera footage from the day Vance died. We don't have cameras inside residential buildings, privacy regulations. But you have them outside, and in hallways, and monitoring the dig site, don't you? Rourke's silence was answer enough. Captain, I said, either you're protecting a killer, or you're protecting classified information that's more important than justice. Either way, you're making yourself look guilty. I'm doing my job. So are we. The difference is our job involves finding the truth. I walked away before he could respond, Loyal trotting beside me. Behind us I heard Rourke slam back into the security building. Another person hiding something. The list was getting long. That evening, 7 people assembled in our quarters. Wolfe, me, Dr. Carraway, Father Anselm, Ingrid Moss, Nee Rita Vale, Captain Rourke, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Marcus Yao, who looked like he was planning our deaths. Wolfe sat behind the desk. I stood near the door with Loyal. Everyone else found seats where they could. Thank you for coming, Wolfe said. I'll be direct. Dr. Vance was murdered because he discovered something that threatened financial and political interests worth millions of dollars. The supposed heat stroke was staged to cover a killing. I intend to prove this, identify the killer, and ensure justice is served. Bold talk, Yao said. Any evidence? Substantial evidence. But first I need clarity on several points. Wolfe looked at Carraway. Dr. Carraway, you found the body. Describe what you saw. She took a breath. I knocked on Lionel's door around 6:15. No answer. I used my emergency key, standard protocol for senior staff. Found him on the floor near his desk. His face was flushed. He was barely conscious. I called for medical help immediately. Was the air conditioning running? No. The room was like an oven. I thought the unit had failed. But you later learned it had been manually disabled? Dr. Amari told me that yes. Wolfe turned to Yao. You were in the medical bay when Dr. Vance was brought in. What did you observe? Nothing useful. I was treating a burn on my hand. Lab accident. I saw them carry Vance in. Heard Amari pronounce him dead. That's all. You didn't notice anything unusual about the body? I'm a mineralogist, not a coroner. But you do have medical training. Your file indicates 3 years of pre-med before you switched to geology. Yao's face went carefully blank. That was 15 years ago, yet still relevant. You would recognize symptoms inconsistent with heat stroke. I saw what I saw. If you're accusing me, I'm observing facts, Mr. Yao, nothing more. Wolfe shifted focus to Rourke. Captain, I need access to your security camera footage from the 48 hours preceding Dr. Vance's death. That's not possible. Why? Because it's been deleted. The room went silent. Explain, Wolfe said, voice dangerous. Rourke looked miserable. Standard protocol is to archive footage weekly. The week Vance died, there was a system malfunction. 3 days of footage were corrupted and automatically deleted. Convenient malfunction. It happens. Old equipment, harsh climate, power fluctuations, or deliberate sabotage by someone who needed to erase evidence. Rourke said nothing. Wolfe turned to Ingrid Moss. You claim to have evidence of Mr. Delling's fraudulent operations. Present it. She pulled out a laptop. Over the past 3 years, Delling's Foundation has received 18 million in federal archaeological grants. Of that, approximately 14 million went to operational expenses and equipment that can't be accounted for. Meanwhile, Delling personally filed mineral rights claims on every single property where his foundation discovered archaeological significance. The pattern is obvious. Manufacture fake archaeological sites, get government funding, find convenient mineral deposits, profit. Can you prove the sites were fake? Not conclusively, but I can prove the surveys were rushed. The peer reviews were conducted by Delling's personal contacts, and the mineral discoveries always happened within 6 months of initial funding. The odds of that being coincidence are astronomical. And Dr. Vance discovered this pattern? He figured it out 2 weeks before he died. I know because he contacted me. We'd been communicating under pseudonyms. He knew I was investigating Delling. He had proof the Rock Springs site was fake, that the Spanish mission was actually just surface rubble arranged to look convincing. Where is this proof? He said he'd hidden it somewhere safe. Encrypted files, physical copies, the works. He was paranoid, rightfully so as it turned out. Wolfe looked at Carraway. Did Dr. Vance discuss any of this with you? Not specifically, but he'd become secretive in his final weeks, defensive about his files. He started insisting I leave the lab when he was working on certain analyses. Which analyses? Soil composition, primarily. He was fixated on proving the uranium deposits were natural, not artificially salted. Salted? I asked. Moss answered. It's an old mining scam. Introduce trace minerals to a site to make it look naturally valuable. Delling's probably done it before. Wolfe leaned back, and his chair protested. Here is what I believe happened. Dr. Vance discovered Rock Springs was a fraud. He collected evidence and prepared to expose Mr. Delling. Someone, either Delling himself or an associate, decided Vance was too dangerous to live. That person disabled his air conditioning, likely administered a substance that mimicked heat stroke symptoms, and waited for death. The corrupted security footage was either convenient coincidence or deliberate sabotage. The medical diagnosis was either mistaken or complicit. That's speculation, Yao said. It's reconstruction, and it can be proved through toxicology. Dr. Vance's body was preserved, yes? Rourke nodded reluctantly. In the medical bay, refrigerated, pending federal investigation. Then I require a complete autopsy by an independent pathologist. Agent Kemper can arrange this. You'll never get authorization in time, Rourke said. I already have it. Agent Kemper provided emergency authority this morning. Wolfe pulled out a document. The autopsy will be conducted tomorrow. If it confirms my hypothesis, we'll know the method. Finding the killer becomes merely a matter of opportunity and motive. He looked around the room. Which brings me to my final point. One of you killed Dr. Vance. One of you had the means, opportunity, and motive to commit murder. I will identify you. The only question is whether you confess now or wait for the evidence to make confession irrelevant. Silence. Then Yao stood. I'm not listening to this anymore. You have no authority, no evidence, and no right to accuse anyone here. I have federal authority, accumulating evidence, and the moral right to seek justice for a murdered man. Sit down, Mr. Yao. Go to hell. He left, slamming the door. The others shifted uncomfortably. Anyone else wish to leave? Wolfe asked. No one moved. Excellent, then we'll continue. He proceeded to grill them for another 2 hours, methodical, relentless questions about timelines, relationships, financial interests, By the time he dismissed them at 9:30, everyone looked exhausted, except Wolfe, who looked energized. "Progress," he announced after the last person left. "You know who did it?" "Not yet, but I know who didn't, which eliminates variables." He stood, stretching. "Tomorrow the autopsy results will arrive. The day after I'll have my answer." "You sound confident." "I am confident. The killer made one crucial mistake." "What mistake?" "They forgot that clever murders require perfect execution. And perfection, Archie, is impossible. There's always a flaw, always an oversight, always a moment where brilliance becomes arrogance." He smiled. "We need only find that moment." I hoped he was right. Because in my experience, killers who thought they were clever were also the ones most willing to kill again, to protect their cleverness. And we were a long way from home, surrounded by people who might be murderers, in a desert that could kill you just as efficiently as any human. Sleep didn't come easily that night. But then again, it never did when you were hunting killers. The autopsy results arrived by military courier at 10:47 a.m. the next morning, a Thursday, though Wolfe had forbidden me from pointing that out. The pathologist report was 40 pages of medical terminology that I could barely pronounce, let alone understand. But Wolfe read it in less than 15 minutes, his face growing darker with each page. Finally, he set it down and looked at me. "Atropine poisoning," he said, "administered orally, probably in food or drink, approximately 1 to 2 hours before death. Enough to cause the symptoms," Trixie observed: dilated pupils, flushed skin, confusion, eventual circulatory collapse. Combined with the disabled air conditioning and desert heat, it created a perfect storm that mimicked heat stroke. "Can they trace where the atropine came from?" "Atropine occurs naturally in several plants: deadly nightshade, Jimson weed, mandrake, all of which grow in desert regions. So someone with botanical knowledge or access to a chemistry lab. Atropine is also synthesized for medical use." He tapped the report. The pathologist notes traces of Jimson weed alkaloids, suggesting natural extraction rather than pharmaceutical grade. Someone harvested plants, created a crude tincture, and dosed Dr. Vance's food. Trixie's food? Possibly, or something he consumed privately. The report estimates ingestion occurred around 4 p.m. Dr. Vance ate lunch in the mess hall at 1:30, so unless someone poisoned him at lunch and the atropine was extremely delayed, he consumed something later in his quarters. I thought about this. So we're looking for someone with access to his quarters, knowledge of desert plants, and the ability to prepare a poison without being noticed, and the motive to use it. Wolfe stood. "Archie, I need you to do 3 things. First, search Dr. Vance's quarters for any food or drink containers that might have held the poison. Second, talk to Trixie about what Vance ate that day. Third, find out who on this station has botanical knowledge." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to examine the sealed chamber in the excavation." "You're going outside? In the heat?" "I'm going to work before noon makes that decision lethal. Come find me when you have information." He actually made it outside, though watching him navigate the desert heat was like watching a whale attempt to climb a ladder. Technically possible, but clearly against nature. I gave him 20 minutes head start, then went to execute my assignments. Dr. Vance's quarters had been sealed by Captain Rourke after the death, but Davis had provided me with a master key. Inside, the room still felt like a crime scene, sterile, frozen in time, haunted by absence. I started in the kitchenette. Standard setup: small refrigerator, hot plate, coffee maker, sink. The refrigerator contained milk, expired, some fruit, going bad, and 3 beers, still good. In the cabinet I found coffee, tea bags, crackers, and a half-empty jar of honey. The honey bothered me. It was local, from a desert beekeeper in Casa Grande according to the label. Nice touch for an archaeologist who appreciated authenticity. But the jar's lid was loose, and when I opened it, there were grains of something that wasn't honey at the bottom, darker, almost black particles that didn't dissolve when I stirred. I sealed the jar in an evidence bag and kept searching. In the bedroom, I found Vance's personal notebook, not his official research notes, but a leather-bound journal he'd kept separately. Most entries were mundane: observations about the dig, complaints about the heat, sketches of pottery fragments. But the final week's entries were different. October 14, Confirmed it. The deposit is real, but the artifacts are fake. Someone seeded the site. Must document everything before they realize I know. October 16th. Sent samples to Phoenix. If I'm right, this entire project is fraud. October 18. Confronted VD. He threatened me. Said I didn't understand the stakes. Said I was expendable. Need to secure evidence off-site. October 19. Too dangerous to keep files here. Encrypted copies to 3 locations. Physical backup hidden in... The entry stopped mid-sentence. The next page was torn out. I swore under my breath. Whatever Vance had written about the backup location, someone had removed it, probably after his death. I photographed every page, pocketed the notebook, and went to find Trixie. The kitchen was her domain. Industrial stoves, walk-in pantry, industrial refrigerators humming quietly. Trixie was chopping onions with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades wielding knives. "Morning, detective boy," she said without looking up. "Found the killer yet?" "Working on it." Question: what did Dr. Vance eat on the day he died? Same thing as everyone else at lunch. Chicken stew, cornbread, salad. He had seconds on the stew. Complimented my seasoning. Her knife work never slowed. Didn't see him at dinner. Figured he was working late. Did he ever eat between meals? Sometimes. He'd come grab fruit or make tea. Had a sweet tooth. Loved my honey. I keep the local stuff special for people who appreciate it. Honey from Casa Grande? Yeah, from Martinez Apiary. Best desert honey you can get. Why? I showed her the evidence bag. I found this in Vance's quarters. See those dark particles at the bottom? Trixie stopped chopping. She took the bag, held it to the light, and her expression hardened. That's not honey. What is it? Looks like Jimson weed seeds. Ground up, probably. She set the bag down carefully. You think someone poisoned the honey? That's exactly what I think. Shit. Trixie wiped her hands on her apron. That honey jar was in my pantry until 3 days before Vance died. Someone must have tampered with it, then returned it to the pantry so I'd give it to him. Who has access to your pantry? Everyone. Technically. I don't lock it. People grab snacks all the time. But the honey was on a higher shelf. You'd have to deliberately look for it. Who knew Vance liked that honey specifically? Trixie thought. Most people, probably. He mentioned it at dinner a few times. Said it reminded him of honey from Brazil, where he'd worked in the 50s. Dead end. Anyone at the station could have known. One more question, I said. Who here knows enough about desert plants to identify and harvest Jimson weed?
Father Anselm. Definitely. He's been in the desert for decades, knows every plant that grows out here. Dr. Caraway has botanical training from her anthropology work, and Marcus Yao did his dissertation on desert chemical compositions that includes plant alkaloids.
What about Delling? Rich boy from Manhattan. Couldn't identify a cactus if it stabbed him. She resumed chopping, but he could pay someone to do the identifying for him. Fair point. I thanked Trixie and headed for the excavation site, where I found Wolfe standing at the edge of the deep pit, looking down at the sealed chamber like it had personally offended him. Father Anselm was with him, both men sweating despite the shade canopy overhead. Find anything? I asked. Questions, Wolfe said. Father Anselm has been explaining the historical inconsistencies at this site. The Spanish Mission Foundation is legitimate, 16th century, consistent with regional construction, but the older structure beneath is problematic. Anselm gestured to the stonework. Hohokam culture typically used adobe and simple stone. This is too sophisticated. Precision cutting. Architectural planning beyond their known capabilities. It's almost wrong. Wrong how? I asked. They asked. Wrong like it was built by someone who studied Hohokam architecture, but didn't quite understand it. Someone creating a forgery. Anselm climbed down into the pit, Wolfe and I following. Lionel noticed this immediately. He said the sealed chamber was the key, that if we opened it, we'd find either proof of fraud or something much stranger. Stranger how? He wouldn't say, but he was excited, scared but excited. We stood before the sealed chamber. Up close, I could see where someone had carefully mortared stones across what was obviously an entrance. Professional work, but recent. The mortar was lighter than the surrounding stone. Can we open it? I asked. Not without authorization, Anselm said. Miriam has been delaying, claims we need proper permits. But between you and me, I think she's afraid of what we'll find. Or what we won't find, Wolfe said. He ran his hand along the mortar. This chamber was sealed recently within the past 5 years. The mortar hasn't weathered properly for ancient construction. So someone sealed it after the site was discovered. Or sealed it as part of creating the site. Father Anselm, can this chamber be opened discreetly? Define discreetly. Without Dr. Carraway's knowledge or Mr. Delling's interference. Anselm grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. Tonight after midnight, when everyone's asleep, I'll need tools from the equipment shed. But yes, I can open it. Excellent. Archie will assist you. I will? You will. I have no intention of climbing into dusty chambers in the middle of the night. That's what assistants are for. One of these days I'm going to read my job description and confirm this isn't in there. Archie, everything is in there. You simply haven't read carefully enough. We climbed out of the pit. Wolfe was moving slowly, clearly affected by the heat. By the time we reached our quarters, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. I hate this place, he announced, collapsing into his chair. I hate the heat, the dust, the dryness, the endless horizon, and the complete absence of civilized comfort. But you love the mystery. I tolerate the mystery because Dr. Vance deserves justice. There's a difference. I gave him my report, the poisoned honey, Vance's journal, the torn page. He listened, eyes closed, thinking. The honey explains method, he said finally, but not opportunity. Who had access to both the pantry and Dr. Vance's quarters to retrieve the jar after he'd taken it? Dr. Carraway had keys to all quarters. Captain Rourke has master keys. Delling probably could get keys if he wanted, and anyone could have stolen them temporarily. Which means everyone remains suspect. Wolfe opened his eyes. But the journal entry is enlightening. VD. Victor Delling presumably threatened Dr. Vance directly. Admitted he considered Vance expendable. That's motive and threat combined. But is it murder? Not yet. Merely foundation. We need the sealed chamber's contents. Tonight's excursion may provide that. The rest of the day passed slowly. Wolfe read financial reports. I walked the station with Loyal, noting patterns of movement, checking sightlines, trying to determine who had been where when Vance died. The dogs back home would have been useful. Caesar's instinct for threat, Mars's aggressive intelligence, Apollo's ability to track scent patterns. But we had Loyal, and Loyal was no fool. He kept close to me, alert, aware that something was wrong in this place. Dinner in the mess hall was tense. Everyone knew about the autopsy results. Davies had apparently informed Captain Rourke, who'd told Dr. Carraway, who'd told everyone else. Now people were looking at each other differently. Suspicion had replaced casual conversation. Victor Delling sat alone at a corner table, eating mechanically, looking old and tired. Marcus Yao had abandoned dinner entirely. Ingrid Moss was taking notes, probably already writing her exposé. Father Anselm gave me a subtle nod. Confirmation for tonight. At 11:30 p.m., I met Anselm at the equipment shed. He'd gathered tools, pry bars, a small sledgehammer, chisels, and a portable work light. We walked to the dig site in silence, Loyal trailing behind, alert to every sound in the desert night. The excavation was eerily beautiful under starlight, all those ancient shadows, all that history buried and waiting. We climbed down to the sealed chamber and got to work. The mortar was tougher than it looked, but Anselm knew what he was doing. Patient, methodical chipping, working around the stones rather than through them. It took 90 minutes, but finally we had an opening large enough to peer inside. I shined the work light through the gap. The chamber was small, maybe 8 feet square, and completely empty except for a single object in the center. A modern safe, industrial grade, sitting incongruously among ancient stones. Well, I said, that's not archaeological. No, Anselm agreed. That's evidence. The safe was locked, naturally, but it had a combination dial, not a key, which meant someone visited regularly to access it. I photographed it from every angle, noting the manufacturer, Sentinel, industrial model, the combination mechanism, and the lack of dust or dirt on its surface. Someone had placed this safe recently and used it frequently. Can you open it? Anselm asked. Not without either the combination or several hours I don't have. But I know someone who can. I called Wolfe on the radio Davies had provided. He answered on the second call, voice thick with sleep. This had better be critical, Archie. Found Vance's hidden evidence. It's in a safe inside the sealed chamber. Sentinel industrial model, combination lock. Describe the dial configuration. I did. Wolfe was silent for a moment. That model has a default override combination. 782355. Try it. How do you know that? I once investigated a theft from a jewelry store that used identical safes. The owner was too lazy to change the default. Try it. I tried it. The safe opened. Inside were three things: a manila envelope, a hard drive, and a handwritten note. The note read, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead." Everything Delling claimed about Rock Springs is a lie. The artifacts are fake, planted to justify the dig. The real goal is the uranium deposit beneath the site. I've documented everything: surveys, financial records, communications proving Delling knew the site was fraudulent. The enclosed drive contains encrypted files. Password is Montevideo1937. Give this to the FBI. Make sure my death means something. Lionel. I radioed this to Wolfe. He was quiet for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Then, bring everything back immediately. And Archie, be very careful. If the killer suspects you found this, you're next. Anselm and I sealed the chamber as well as we could, making it look undisturbed. We made it back to the complex by 1:45 a.m., moving carefully, watching shadows. Loyal stayed close, alert. In our quarters, Wolfe was fully awake, dressed, examining Vance's journal and the new evidence. He read the note 3 times, opened the envelope, financial records, just as Vance had promised, and held the hard drive like it was made of gold. "This is our proof," he said. "Agent Kemper needs to see this immediately. It's almost 2 a.m. Then he'll lose sleep, as I have." Wolfe picked up the phone. While he talked to Kemper, I thought about everything we'd learned. The poisoned honey, the fake archaeological site, the uranium fraud, the murdered archaeologist who documented everything. It was all there. Method, motive, opportunity. We just needed to prove who'd actually committed the murder. But in my gut I already knew. There was only one person who had everything to lose, who had the resources, who had explicitly threatened Vance. The question was whether we could prove it before that person realized we were close. Outside, the desert night was silent. Too silent. I checked my .38, made sure it was loaded, and settled in to wait for morning. Because morning would bring either justice or danger. Probably both. The 8 a.m. meeting felt like a trial. Wolfe had ordered everyone to assemble in the mess hall, all 14 station personnel, Agent Davies and Captain Rourke. The only exception was Dr. Amari, who was dealing with a medical emergency in Phoenix. Convenient timing, I noted. Wolfe sat at the head of the largest table, looking like a judge about to deliver verdict. I stood behind him with Loyal. Davies stood near the door, hand resting casually on his sidearm. Victor Delling arrived last, flanked by 2 security personnel I hadn't seen before, probably his personal staff. He looked defiant, angry, and underneath it all, scared. "This is outrageous," he started. "You can't just—" "Mr. Delling, please sit down," Wolfe said. His voice was mild, almost gentle. "You'll want to be seated for what follows." Something in Wolfe's tone made Delling sit. Wolfe surveyed the room. Dr. Lionel Vance was murdered 4 days ago. The method was atropine poisoning, administered via tampered honey, combined with disabled air conditioning to create symptoms mimicking heat stroke. The motive was to silence a man who discovered that Rock Springs is an elaborate fraud designed to justify illegal mineral exploitation. Murmurs swept the room. Some people looked shocked. Others, like Carraway and Anselm, looked grimly satisfied, as if suspicions were being confirmed. "Last night," Wolfe continued, "Mr. Goodwin recovered evidence Dr. Vance had hidden before his death, comprehensive documentation, proving that this archaeological site is fake, that artifacts were planted, that surveys were falsified, and that the entire operation was designed to grant access to uranium deposits while maintaining a cover of scientific legitimacy." Delling shot to his feet. "That's slander. I'll sue you for every penny." "Sit down, Mr. Delling." Wolfe's voice hardened. I haven't accused you yet, though your eagerness to deny accusations not yet made is revealing. Delling sat, face purple. The evidence proves fraud, Wolfe said. But fraud isn't murder. To identify the killer, we must examine who had means, motive and opportunity. Let's consider each. He gestured to me. I pulled out my notes. Means, atropine poison from Jimson weed. According to Trixie Landauer, 3 people at this station have sufficient botanical knowledge to harvest and prepare Jimson weed tincture. Father Anselm Boyce, Dr. Miriam Carraway, and Mr. Marcus Yao. All 3 tensed. Opportunity, access to both the kitchen pantry and Dr. Vance's private quarters. This requires keys, which limits suspects to Dr. Carraway, Captain Rourke, and anyone capable of stealing keys temporarily, essentially anyone at the station. This is ridiculous, Jan said. You're accusing everyone. I'm eliminating variables, Mr. Yao. Please allow me to continue. Wolfe looked at his notes. Motive, financial interest in maintaining the fraud. Mr. Delling has the obvious motive, 17% ownership in a mining company, plus mineral rights claims worth millions. But others benefit indirectly. Dr. Carraway's career depends on the legitimacy of her work here. Captain Rourke's security contract is lucrative. Various technicians and staff have high-paying jobs they'd lose if Rock Springs closed. So everyone had motive too, Carraway said. This isn't narrowing suspects, it's expanding them. Precisely. Which is why we must consider a more subtle factor. Who knew Dr. Vance had discovered the fraud and documented it? Who knew he was dangerous? Wolfe stood, a production that took several seconds. Dr. Vance had an argument with Mr. Delling 2 days before his death. A loud argument, heard by multiple witnesses. Mr. Delling explicitly threatened Dr. Vance, stating he was expendable. This establishes that Mr. Delling knew Vance was a threat. I didn't kill him, Delling shouted. No, Mr. Delling, you didn't. Because you're many things, fraudulent, greedy, morally bankrupt. But you're not stupid. Killing Dr. Vance yourself would be catastrophically obvious. You needed someone else to do it. Someone loyal to you, someone who'd benefit from protecting your investment. Wolfe turned to Captain Rourke. Captain Preston Rourke, former Army intelligence, currently head of security at Rock Springs. You were present during the argument between Delling and Vance. You had master keys to all quarters. You had opportunity to tamper with the honey jar in the kitchen, then retrieve it from Vance's quarters after you disabled his air conditioning and waited for the poison to take effect. You also had the authority to delete security camera footage and classify it as system malfunction. Rourke's face was stone. You can't prove any of that. Can't I? Mr. Goodwin, please present item 7 from Dr. Vance's recovered files. I pulled out a photograph from the envelope we'd found. It showed Rourke entering Vance's quarters the afternoon of the murder, timestamp clearly visible. This photograph was taken by Dr. Vance's personal security camera, a small device he'd installed secretly after the argument with Mr. Delling. He was paranoid, rightfully so. The camera uploaded images to cloud storage every hour. Agent Davis retrieved them this morning. Rourke stood slowly. His hand moved toward his holster. I wouldn't, Davies said from the doorway, his own weapon now visible. You're outgunned and surrounded. You have no authority here, Rourke said. This is my station. Actually, Wolfe said, it's a crime scene, and you, Captain, are under arrest for the murder of Dr. Lionel Vance. What happened next happened fast. Rourke drew his weapon. Loyal, who'd been sitting quietly beside me, moved like lightning, 65 pounds of muscle and protective instinct launching across the room. He hit Rourke's arm just as the gun fired, deflecting the shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Davies tackled Rourke from behind. They went down hard, Loyal still holding Rourke's gun arm in his jaws. Within seconds, Davies had Rourke in handcuffs. Good boy, I said. Loyal released Rourke's arm and trotted back to me, tail wagging slightly. The room erupted in noise. Questions, accusations, shock. Delling was shouting something about lawyers. Carraway looked like she might cry or kill someone, possibly both. Yao was on his feet, demanding explanations. Wolfe raised his hand. Gradually, silence returned. Captain Rourke murdered Dr. Vance on behalf of Victor Delling, Wolfe said. The evidence is conclusive. Rourke had means. He harvested Jimson weed from the desert. easily identified by someone with his survival training. He had opportunity, keys to Vance's quarters, authority to move freely, ability to disable the air conditioning, and he had motive, protecting Delling's investment, and more importantly, protecting his own lucrative security contract. But Delling ordered it, Carraway said. He's responsible. Morally, perhaps. Legally, that requires proof of conspiracy, which may be difficult without Rourke's cooperation. Wolfe looked at Delling. However, Mr. Delling's fraud is well documented. The FBI will pursue charges accordingly. I suspect his lawyers will be quite busy. Delling didn't respond. He looked defeated, old, broken. As for the rest of you, Wolfe continued, you've been unwitting participants in an elaborate fraud. Agent Kemper will interview everyone individually. Cooperation is advised. The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos. Davies calling for backup, people demanding answers, the slow realization that their jobs, their research, their entire purpose here was built on lies. I retrieved Loyal, checked him for injuries, none thankfully, and joined Wolfe in our quarters. He collapsed into his chair with a sigh that came from deep in his bones. Confound it, he muttered. I want to go home. Mission accomplished first, beer later. Beer now, home tomorrow. That's negotiable only in sequence, not timing. I poured him a beer from the small refrigerator. He drank half of it in one long swallow. You knew it was Rourke, I said. When? When Trixie described the body's appearance, specifically the dilated pupils. Atropine poisoning causes extreme mydriasis, which is distinctive. Someone with medical training would notice immediately. Yao has medical background, but he dismissed the symptoms as heat stroke. Captain Rourke, with his army intelligence training, would certainly have medical field experience, yet he also claimed heat stroke. Why? Because he knew what he was looking for and what he wanted others to think they were seeing. Precisely. Add the deleted security footage, his authority over the station, his presence during Delling's threat, and his access to all necessary resources. The conclusion became inevitable. But you couldn't prove it without Vance's hidden camera. No, which is why we had to recover the evidence from the sealed chamber. Without that, Rourke walks free, and Delling merely faces fraud charges. Will Delling face conspiracy charges? Possibly. That depends on whether Rourke cooperates, which depends on what deal the FBI offers him. Wolfe finished his beer. Justice is imperfect, Archie. We caught the killer, but the architect of this fraud may escape with relatively minor penalties. That's the nature of the law. It punishes action more severely than instigation. Still, Vance gets justice. Yes, Lionel gets justice. That's what matters. Agent Kemper arrived 2 hours later with a full FBI team, forensics, interrogators, lawyers. They took Rourke into custody, formally arrested Delling on fraud charges, and began the long process of dismantling Rock Springs. Kemper shook Wolfe's hand. Excellent work, Mr. Wolfe. Exactly what we needed. You knew Rourke was suspicious. We suspected. Couldn't prove it. You did what we couldn't. I solved a murder. You do the rest. Fair division of labor. Kemper handed me an envelope. Your payment, as promised, and the government's gratitude. The government's gratitude doesn't keep orchids alive, Wolfe said, but the payment is acceptable. We left Rock Springs that afternoon, military transport back to Tucson, commercial flight to New York. Wolfe complained about every minute of travel, but underneath the complaints I could sense relief. He'd solved the case, secured payment, and earned the right to return to his brownstone. Loyal slept most of the flight home, exhausted from his heroics. I'd make sure Caesar and the pack heard about it. Loyal had earned serious respect. We arrived at the brownstone at 11:47 p.m. on Friday. The lights were on, Fritz and Theodore waiting. The dogs erupted when we entered, a controlled chaos of welcoming. Caesar inspected us thoroughly. Mars circled protectively. Apollo bounced with joy. Minerva observed with satisfaction, and Diana darted between everyone's legs. Loyal accepted their greetings with weary dignity, like a soldier returning from war. Fritz had dinner waiting, real food, expertly prepared, served at the proper temperature. Wolfe ate 3 portions and looked happier than I'd seen him in days. Inspector Kramer showed up at midnight, which was early for him when we'd been traveling. Heard you survived Arizona, he said, settling into his usual chair. Caesar sniffed his shoes. gave grudging approval, and settled nearby. Also heard you solved a federal case that had the FBI stumped. We identified a murderer and documented a fraud, Wolfe said. Hardly stumped, merely complicated. And you're back home, which means I get to deal with your cases locally again instead of reading about them in FBI reports. Kramer pulled out a cigar, saw Wolfe's expression, and put it away. So, was it worth it? Wolfe considered the question. Dr. Vance deserved justice. He received it. That's worth considerable discomfort. But you're never doing it again. Never is a strong word, Inspector. Let's say I'm strongly disinclined to repeat the experience. I'll take that as a no. Kramer stood. Welcome home, Wolfe. Try to stay here for a while, yeah? New York misses you when you're gone. After he left, Wolfe retired to his bedroom. I finished my beer, checked the dogs, all present, all content, and headed upstairs myself. Through my window, I could see the city lights, millions of them, familiar and warm. No desert heat, no endless horizons, no killers hiding in dusty compounds. Just home. Loyal settled at the foot of my bed, already asleep. His collar gleamed in the dim light. Loyal, in bold letters, over the brass plate with our address. He'd earned that name today, earned his place in the pack, earned his place in this brownstone. I turned off the light and thought about Dr. Vance, an archaeologist who died for finding the truth, about Captain Rourke, a killer who'd tried to bury that truth in desert sand, about Victor Delling, a fraud who'd built an empire on lies, and about Nero Wolfe, a brilliant, stubborn, impossible detective who'd solved it all because someone he'd met once, 15 years ago, had sent a telegram asking for help. In the end, that's what justice was, one person helping another, even across years and miles, even at great personal cost. The desert was behind us, but the next case was already waiting. It always was.